Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining today's Women in Fund Finance webinar. My name is Alain Ben-Ghiblia. I'm Head of Financial Sponsors Europe at ANZ and co-chair of the WFF EMEA board. Women in Fund Finance is a global community dedicated to advancing, connecting, and supporting women across the fund finance industry through education, dialogue, and shared experience. Today's session marks the first event in our AI series for the year, where we'll move beyond the hype to build a practical understanding of how AI is shaping our industry and our careers, with further sessions to follow over the coming months. Before we begin, a sincere thank you to our moderator, Isabella Mashru, and to our panelists for sharing their time and expertise with us today. With that, I'm delighted to hand over to Isabella to introduce the speakers and kick off the discussion.
Thanks, Alan. And thank you everyone for joining us for this session. As mentioned, my name is Isabella Mashru. I'm a partner in the fund finance team at Clifford Chance in London. As Alan mentioned, this is the first of a series of sessions looking at AI and its role in fund finance, and in particular the opportunities that it gives rise to for members of our community. The purpose of this session is to provide a general overview of what we mean by AI, what those technologies can and cannot do, and how institutions and individuals can apply them in practice. I suspect that for most of the audience, you'll be using AI to some degree in your personal lives, but our sense is that there's quite a broad range of rates of adoption in workplaces, and certainly quite a large degree of uncertainty around the impact that developments in AI will have on our careers. There's no doubt that AI promises to substantially change the way that we all operate day to day. And we hope with this session to leave you with a fuller sense of the opportunities offered by AI and also to sort of how to use and adapt those tools to drive your career. We will leave some time for questions at the end, so do please submit them in the Q&A as we go along and we'll pick some out. We are very lucky to have three panelists who are extremely experienced in this space, and I'm pleased to hand over to them to introduce themselves. Perhaps Jennifer, do you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, all. I'm happy to be here. I'm Jennifer Warren, a commercial growth and innovation strategist with over 20 years of experience in financial services, mainly across the US, UK, and UAE. I have founded and am principal of Growth 6, which is an advisory platform working with corporates, investors, and founders to translate growth and innovation strategies into real value creation. I'm also co-founder of NOAA Regen, a sustainable finance platform, and I was previously head of global markets digital strategy at Barclays. And I'm currently based between New York City and Dubai.
Jonathan, perhaps you want to go next?
Great, thank you. Hello all, Jonathan Lesis, Head of AI at KBRA. I've been with the KBRA for a little over a year and a half now, helping them on their AI transformation journey. Prior to KBRA, I was in consultancy for about 10 years, and then 25 years or so in various companies with a large focus on financial services. So a lot of my attention is at the intersection of digital ways of working in AI, and really glad to be here today.
Fantastic. Francesca?
Hello, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Francesca Bennett, and I am a partner in the Markets Innovation Group at A&O Sherman. The Markets Innovation Group, I think, is a really interesting group for a law firm. So I am a lawyer by background, but I work alongside our in-house team of developers and technologists working out how best to integrate technology into the legal services and solutions that we develop internally. So we develop proprietary tech solutions within our team, and we also explore how best to use kind of third-party tech tools that we then license indirectly from other suppliers. The other kind of hat that I wear in the firm is working out how best to drive AI adoption amongst our teams. So a particular focus on training, on recruitment, on the skills we need to be teaching our lawyers in order to maximize the use of this technology, but also to enable them to be kind of the best lawyers they can be, given the current kind of changes in technology.
Perfect for this panel. Perhaps we can kick off with you, Francesca, sort of just looking at the basics of AI, and in particular, as a sort of setting the scene for this talk. What do we mean by AI? There are lots of terms being used, so AI, machine learning, generative AI. Could you just talk us through sort of what each of those mean in summary?
Yeah, and I'll do it at a very high level, but please do ask questions kind of in the panel if there's anything that you'd like us to dig into in more detail. But and bearing in mind, I'm a lawyer explaining this, so caveats around my not slightly non-technical language. But the way that I think of kind of artificial intelligence is a kind of very broad umbrella term that covers a large range of technologies. But in essence, it's using computers to do something that otherwise humans would do. So something like identifying patterns or making predictions or generating or understanding language. That's how I think of artificial intelligence, like as an umbrella term. Machine learning has been around for a long time and is actually the base of how most modern AI actually learns. And the way that it works is that the machine system is exposed to huge amounts of lots of examples, lots of data, and then it learns and finds patterns from that on its own. So, but in my kind of world, when we were trying to use machine learning tools, for example, for due diligence, we would show a tool number of examples of transfer clauses so that it would then be able to identify transfer clauses in the data set that it was then examining. But it constantly improves with the amount of data and feedback you give it. So it's quite a kind of intensive process getting those machine learning tools up to speed. Generative AI, the most current kind of iteration, well, not the most current, but one of the most current iterations that we're all familiar with, is a specific kind of machine learning. And it doesn't just analyze data, it also creates. So the way I was described generative AI right back when we first started using it by our team of developers is imagine kind of the system has been exposed to a huge amount of data. So some of these LLMs have been exposed to the entirety of the data available on the World Wide Web. And then when you ask a question, what the tool is doing is running kind of out a series of like multiple algorithms over this enormous data set, and then based on the balance of probability, identifying the next word, the next sentence, the next chunk in order to generate content and answer that specific prompt. What it is important to remember is that it's not thinking, it's not a kind of an objective source of truth in its own right. It really is just applying maths. So there is a huge amount, depends on the kind of the question that you're putting in. So if you put in a vague answer, you're going to get a vague response back. If you're asking a question that requires absolutely kind of live up to the minute data, and perhaps that the tool that you're using hasn't got access to that live data, live current data, it won't answer by reference to kind of today's facts. And if in my world, in a legal use case, if you're asking about a very nuanced piece of legislation where there might not be huge amounts of data available to that tool to learn from, you might not get an accurate answer. So it's not in its own right an objective source of truth. What it can do is, based on the balance of probability, based on the kind of the answer, the question you've asked, give what it thinks is the most reasonable answer to that question. That's how I understand it. But and that kind of then helps me then understand the limits of what the tools can do, thinking it within those kind of parameters.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful to understand when you're using some of these tools, because yeah, certainly some of the responses you can get can sound like gospel, and they're clearly not. Jennifer, perhaps we could we've touched obviously on generative AI, but generative AI and agentic AI are sort of clearly hot topics at the moment, and I'm not sure for everyone in the audience it'll be immediately obvious what the difference is between the two of them. Could you talk through the difference between the two of them and actually sort of where we're seeing real value being created from those two tools in practice today?
Absolutely. So as Francesca was saying, generative AI generates content based on user prompts. And this is kind of a back and forth or question and answer type approach. So if generative AI creates, then agentic AI acts or operates. It is able to actually make decisions and take actions to complete a process. So maybe I'll just highlight an example that I've worked on in the Gen AI space to compare it to agentic AI. So for example, with generative AI, you can ask it to synthesize large amounts of data. So for example, bringing in a lot of information and then doing something as simple as generating a PowerPoint presentation or a report or a policy document. In the case, let's say, of a salesperson on a trading floor who is receiving multiple streams of data all day long, and they need to react, they need to manage relationships with clients, they need to be making calls, sending emails, working with traders. There's a lot going on. So generative AI can actually synthesize all of that data. It can understand the profile of that salesperson, what markets and products do they cover, what clients do they cover, what does their client portfolios look like, depending on what level of data the AI is able to receive. And then it can essentially synthesize that data and make recommendations around actions, or we recommend that you could call this client and talk about this market movement, et cetera, because they're receiving earnings reports, analyst research, market moves and news throughout the day, trader axes, et cetera. So in that case, the AI is not acting on behalf of the user. It's merely synthesizing data and then generating content back to that user. In the case of agentic AI, it takes that between a step further to many steps further, ideally, which is really where agentic AI is heading. The challenge with agentic AI is that because it can actually make decisions and act on those decisions to complete multiple steps of a process that are not necessarily visible to any end user because it's operating in the background, depending on how it's built, it raises questions around what level of autonomy is appropriate, what decision making can be delegated, and how do we monitor and intervene if needed. So organizations are really grappling with that, and I would say that we don't have the fully autonomous agents that everyone is kind of aiming to get to, but everyone's really deciding how much can I let this AI agent operate on our behalf, where we are managing risk and also have clear accountability. On the Gen AI side, there are also some concerns around things like hallucinations, for example, which is when AI gives you an incorrect answer that it is very confident is accurate, which could be very misleading to a user. And also, for example, the black box type of concept or lack of explainability. So essentially, you get an answer, but you don't know how that answer was made. And as we all know, in highly regulated industries, explainability and auditability is important. So I would say that there's a lot of progress being made in the productivity and really knowledge worker augmentation space to eliminate a lot of the highly repetitive, low value friction points. But we're still a ways away from fully autonomous agents.
That's actually quite a sort of interesting segue, I guess, sort of if we can go back to you, Francesca, just to look at whether you think there are spaces in which the sort of hype doesn't match the reality right now in terms of what these tools can do, and maybe conversely, if you think there are ways that these tools can be useful in our day-to-day businesses, finance and law, that we're really underestimating currently and maybe not making the most use out of.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I go on quite a number of calls with clients, and quite often I am privy to their wish list of what they think, what they wish these tools could do. And I think top of the list is, I would like to be able to put a document in, and I want it to be able to tell me exactly in red line with comment bubbles exactly how I need to mark it up in order for it to match either a precedent or exactly my preferred terms. And whilst I think AI can get us quite a lot of the way there, it's still never going. It's still not quite at that level of sophistication, particularly when the document is long, the document is complex, there's lots of consequential amends that you might need to make. I often find that it kind of loses track halfway through like a 200, 300 page document, for example. So I think it's not quite at that place yet, but it's not far, if I'm honest. We're kind of getting ever closer to it. So I find it works much better if you chunk up and you ask more focused questions rather than a kind of big generic question. Where I think people are underestimating is internally, we are seeing a huge improvement in the quality of work people are able to do and speed they're able to produce it, because we have worked very hard on making sure our data set that the tool can leverage and access has been curated and cleansed. And then using generative AI to find the most suitable precedents, to find example language, that really has been a game changer for our teams, being able to use that data in a much more accessible way. I also asked our developers how one of our developers, how he would answer this question. And he said actually that in December, he felt there had been a real key change in the way the models were working. And he said it was probably the biggest key change for a number of years, actually. And combination of agentic, the models being much more accurate. He really feels that we're in a place where actually we're going to start being able to get much more complex, much more nuanced, much more accurate answers. So he thinks we're in a really interesting phase at the moment. I saw Jonathan and Jennifer nodding, so I wonder if that December date kicked in as well for you guys.
I had a similar epiphany, so yes.
Exciting, but scary. I think that segues quite nicely into looking at kind of how businesses, actually execute a plan to use these tools in practice and deploy them in their business, very much the kind of strategic execution side of things. I think, per the discussion, there's so much exciting technology available, but sort of defining a clear path to how you create value in your business using those tools is clearly a lot harder. And Jennifer, if we can go back to you, I mean, how do you think firms should think about developing an AI strategy and in particular kind of identifying the right use cases within their businesses and actually measuring the impact of these tools? Because obviously, actually, for many of these tools, and Francesca, you touched on it, there's a lot of work that goes into making these tools useful for a particular business and to get the right results out of them. So sort of how do you make sure that that investment is really paying off in terms of value to the business?
Absolutely. So there is obviously still a lot of hype around AI, and there always will be because it's very much a next-gen lens. The difference now is that it's becoming fundamental to how organizations operate, and it's no longer an option. So the question then becomes, where is the tangible value? And when I see gaps between expectations and results, it almost always comes down to a strategy and execution gap. So I tend to think about this less as a technology program and more as a value creation journey. So there are, of course, many critical dependencies on technology, data, infrastructure, tooling, et cetera. But from a value creation lens, it really comes down to 4 key factors that unlock value. And that is strategy, use case selection, operating model, and adoption. So when I talk about strategy, I don't mean an AI strategy in isolation. I actually mean what are our strategic objectives and what do we want to achieve as a firm? Not specifically in relation to AI, but what do we want to do better? Where are our opportunities and challenges? And then AI becomes an enabler to that if it is in fact the right technology and tool to do so. The second moves into use case selection, which many firms actually really struggle with. It's hard to not chase the headlines of the newest, most exciting thing that is catching headlines, but instead stay very practical in terms of use case selection. So it goes back to your strategic objectives and thinking through how you can achieve each of those. So that's asking your question, where are we spending time on highly repetitive or low value tasks? Where are operational friction points? What are client pain points? These all help solve questions regardless of what your strategic objectives are, which perhaps might be productivity or revenue growth or improving client service or improving risk management or decision making. So layering your use cases underneath your strategy are really important in tying that back. The next is operating model and governance. And AI is an organization-wide capability, and in every case, it cuts across every aspect of the business, whether that be front office, risk, operations, technology, data, et cetera. So it's critical that these cross-functional teams start engaging early on the use cases so that you can scale later and don't end up with any unanticipated consequences that might limit moving into production. At the same time, there needs to be a governance structure and guardrails in place that protect the business, but also encourage and enable innovation, and very importantly, create a path from experimentation to production. So I think that is something that is really key, and finding that balance can be very challenging as well. And then the last is adoption and people. And I think this is often the most important. And I know that we'll talk about this a little bit more, so I won't go into too much detail now. But adoption and behavior change is really what translates experimentation into impact. And this is about bringing people along on the journey, involving them in the use cases, ensuring that you're really extracting the value and embedding the way that AI operates into your workflows and decision making. So in summary, the opportunity with AI is significant and fundamental to the organizations of the future. But I would say that the path to value is perhaps more practical than people might expect. At the end of it, it is really about, just like with any large scale transformation or major innovation, it is about clarity of purpose, disciplined execution, and real focus on improving how the business operates. And that is really how value gets measured.
That makes complete sense. Jonathan, it'd be nice to kind of drill down a bit more on the kind of the execution side of that discussion, because obviously it's great to have a strategic plan and to have implemented all those kind of high level planning steps that we just discussed. But obviously, whether or not you can implement that strategy, it frankly is going to be a game changer for businesses. And then in a world where some businesses will manage to do that successfully, and really drive a huge competitive advantage, I think will be fundamental to which businesses thrive or don't going forward. I know many businesses sort of struggle with scaling the implementation of these tools. What do you think are the kind of key challenges for implementation? And I guess what have you seen as the kind of key factors that determine whether organizations succeed or kind of stall on this front?
Yeah. At my prior job, we always used to say that pilots are simple to execute, fiendishly difficult to scale. And when Francesca was chatting about her experience with requests from clients, I almost had an image in the back of my mind of somebody walking into Francesca and being like, Francesca, I was just in ChatGPT and it gave me this amazing MSA. Like, why do I need lawyers for when ChatGPT can do this, 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 and this? So you have this amazingly accessible, powerful technology, which is so simple to create an impactful, exciting demo, but it's fiendishly hard to scale it. And really gets down to a lot of the things that Francesca and Jennifer have been talking about, which is technology, people, and process. And I'll start with what's actually the easier part, which is the technology. So when you go to shift from a exciting use case, something you did in ChatGPT, something you might have done in Claude Code or Claude Cowork, you have to take into account a large amount of technological shifts. So in other words, how does it integrate with your enterprise data? How do we monitor it? What kind of guardrails and processes can we wrap around it? How can we create a user experience that is intuitive and frictionless? There's a lot of considerations as you go from a very sparkly pilot, which everybody is so excited about, to an industrialized operational platform. So technology is one piece of it, which is, how do you pivot from ChatGPT to maybe using OpenAI's API models with a lot of development wrapped around it? That's issue number one when you go from pilot to full production capability. But really, the biggest one is what Jennifer alluded to, which is the people in the process. So I've been on $3 million, $30 million, $300 million AI projects, and they all trip up on the people in process. So it's something where they don't engage the users during initiation. So the users aren't part of the journey. They don't believe it's something that they're confident in. They feel it was done to them, not with them. So number one is just getting the users involved at the beginning. Number two, this was the $300 million one. You don't change the policies and the procedures. And so you build this amazing, just incredible like AI application platform, and nobody uses it because they're all trained on something else and their policies say, do the something else. So that's the second part of it. And then finally, on the people side, the incentives, which kind of goes with the policies. What are they incented to do? How are they motivated to do their work? And so it's not so much the technology. The technology, of course, absolutely has to shift and pivot, but it's more the second two, the people and the processes that really are critical for making that leap from a sparkly, exciting demo into a true value-producing enterprise product.
I mean, that correlates completely. It's quite interesting on the incentives point that you mentioned, as I was talking to a client earlier in the week about, looking at using AI for certain functions internally. And actually, there was a discussion about, as an individual, was it safer to use an external law firm to do it and leave the risk with them versus develop something internally where ultimately you internally and even with your regulator then have to justify why it's robust and why it works. Whereas historically it's been much easier to just reference, someone else. So I think that kind of incentivization and supporting the kind of not there are extreme risks, but supporting the degree of perhaps risk of the new at least is quite important. Francesca, is that sort of similar to what you've been saying?
I would completely agree with that, actually. And so as you were speaking, Jonathan and Isabella, that was really chiming with exactly my own personal experience. So inside a law firm, I think the things that have really driven adoption and kind of scalability is senior sponsorship. So a very clear message from the top that AI for us is a strategic priority, and there is a very clear expectation that we are, encouraged to use it, expected to use it. I think one of the other challenges is encouraging people to look up from their day-to-day established ways of doing work, which works very well. We've been doing it for years, and really trying to challenge whether or not you could use this technology to reframe or reshape how you do this kind of established piece of work. And I really love the interplay here between our juniors coming through. We really lean on our juniors to really say, can you think of a better way to do this? And we listen to them when they have suggestions, and it's a really wonderful intergenerational transfer of ideas. So where this is how we would have done it traditionally. Can you think of a way we could be using tech to improve it? And they often have really great ideas. And that peer-to-peer feedback, I also find, is a really brilliant way of driving adoption. So if you have in your institution a very enthusiastic adopter, kind of channeling that enthusiasm and getting them to speak to their peers is often more effective than kind of imposing kind of some directive or kind of expecting it to organically blossom. I think that peer-to-peer feedback is really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I always find it quite interesting, as you've touched on, to talk to particularly our juniors about how they're using these tools, because actually it kind of opens your eyes to things that just hadn't occurred to you, which is great. Perhaps we can continue on the kind of people theme, because I really do feel like it's absolutely central to businesses, at least right now, being able to use AI to deliver value, as we were touching on earlier. And Jennifer, perhaps we can go into a bit more detail on kind of how you've seen organizations sort of bring people along on that process of rolling out AI. And to sort of the points that Francesca and Jonathan have raised, sort of almost not forcing, but really incentivizing and driving people to take time out and figure out how to do things, in a new and hopefully more efficient way with these tools.
Absolutely. This goes very much along with what Jonathan and Francesca has said. I think one of the biggest misconceptions that AI is a technology program, when in reality, it's about leadership, culture, people, and change management. So no tech, no matter how good it is, generates any value if people don't use it effectively. So it can't just sit on the desk as an optional toolkit. It actually needs to be embedded into workflows, processes, and the way that incentives are created and roles are reshaped. And those things will need to happen very soon. And we're already seeing that happen. So I think bringing people along comes down to a couple of key things for me, which then cascades down to everything else. And Jonathan already hit on this, which the first one is active involvement from the very beginning. So when this is just bringing the people who do the job into the process, because they're the ones who really understand the friction, and as I said before, understand the opportunities and challenges. So there's a few benefits from this early and continual engagement, which is, one, this is how you get the best use cases. Two, this is how, when people have an opportunity to shape a solution, they're more likely to trust and adopt it. And three, it's a way of upskilling your workforce, because it translates AI from something that is very abstract to something that is very practical. So when people aren't brought along, they tend to resist. When they're involved in the process and actually understand the technology and how it's applied, they're much more likely to innovate. which brings me to the second point, which is an innovation-forward culture and safe places to experiment. So as Francesca was saying, and that tone from the top is so critical, and encouraging people to learn, test, and iterate, and providing guardrails and spaces for them to do that in, because people are obviously concerned about the risks, the potential failure of an idea not working out, and job security if they bring in use cases that potentially reduce their workload, for example, even if it makes them more effective or augments their work. So I think that this is really what is critical in organizations to move from where we are now to where organizations are going to need to be very quickly.
I agree with that. Francesca, is there anything you want to add on that point?
No, completely agree with those, yeah.
I guess actually, if we could perhaps touch on guardrails just quickly before we continue, because it's something we were discussing earlier in the week. And Jonathan, I know you had some strong thoughts on it. And it kind of perhaps goes a little bit back more to the execution side of things. But as you've said, Jennifer, it's kind of relevant in the context of individuals and how they use these tools too. Because I know, again, I was talking to a client earlier in the week, and they were saying that their institution had deployed lots of these tools, but actually had taken the view that they couldn't use any client information in the tools, and therefore, in practice, they weren't able to use the tools day to day at all in reality. And so there's a bit of a disconnect between what they're trying to do as an organization in terms of what tools they're buying in, and actually whether or not the guardrails are proportionate to the risk and actually allow you to use the tech in practice. It'd be quite interesting just to touch on that before we move ahead. Jonathan, if you want to take it.
Absolutely. There's a little bit to unpack here. So let me just try to hit maybe quickly 3 themes to this. Number one is the very first thing anybody should do when they're doing an AI implementation is create a responsible AI principles and guidelines. Like I couldn't imagine starting a broader transformation without having these crucial anchor points in play that inform our business on, what is the right way to approach AI and how do you use AI in a thoughtful, managed way. So you need to start with that. We did it. We did a training session for our board. We then cascaded it down to our leaders. These responsible AI, the principles have been rock solid. Like I was actually surprised. We've had it, very day, probably week 2 activity. And I looked back at it recently and the principles are rock solid. They haven't changed at all. But the guidelines have shifted tremendously. So, how do you deal with images? How do you deal with privacy? How do you deal with agentic AI? Like the guidelines, which are the tactical rules of the road for how they engage with AI, go through almost frequent iterations and changes. I think it's important to, when you roll out responsible AI, to have these founding principle content, and then to train the employees. And I always try to seek, simple clarity. I'm a big believer of simple rules, complex behavior, complex rules, simple behavior. So we try to clearly articulate, here are the things that you need to keep in mind. Always keep your hands on the wheel. We always have a human in the loop. At the end of the day, you're responsible for the work, not the AI. And so to be clear on, you touched on things like privacy, what is appropriate use, and making sure that employees not just get training on it, but they also attest to it, and we track it. So I would say that's a big part of it, like how you approach responsible AI from a large umbrella perspective, how you train and educate your employees in a simple and clear way. When we're onboarding new tools, we always go through a battery of a full contact team support, where it's legal, info security, compliance, myself, the business, to make sure the tools are fit for use. But the way we position it within our company is that if it's something that you use within your daily work, it's appropriate to use with AI. And we ensure with our guardrails at the front of it that we're doing those checks to make sure we're not bringing in products that have permissive terms and conditions or lack the info security guardrails. So we do that upfront blocking and tackling, and then we inform people. We try to let them, leverage these tools to the fullest. And there's a few guardrails. For example, when you're using a AI tool internally, you might have a third-party data that you're not permitted to use in AI to create derivative works, this kind of thing. Or we also say when it comes to privacy, you can use the AI for anything that you would do in your daily job, but try to minimize the use of private information. Try to be, don't throw everything in the kitchen sink into AI. Really be thoughtful on what's the task at hand and kind of filtering it down. So that was maybe quite a bit. I would say AI is there to be leveraged, and companies across the world are going all in on it. And the technology is robust. The companies that provide these solutions have, guardrails in place. So it's a matter of navigating that within the business and making sure to educate the employees and inform them clearly on what's the appropriate use. That was a lot. So if there's any questions on that, feel free to throw them in the chat.
Put them in the chat, exactly. But I think actually that's also a nice segue into kind of looking at this more from an individual perspective and how, as an individual, do you make the most use of these tools? Because there's obviously the top-down aspect of a business executing a strategy and ensuring that these tools are available to employees and hopefully using them. But as an individual, looking at your career, looking at how careers might change, I think being on top of what's available and actually experimenting with how to use the tools and really maximizing even your own understanding of what they are and being able to communicate that to others. And, we have chats with clients all the time about what are we doing with AI and how we providing value. That's just a very basic example. I think is fundamental. So it's probably interesting to have a bit more of a look at, how those, for example, in the fund finance industry who are curious about, AI and what these tools can do, some sort of practical ways that they can start experimenting with them and building familiarity with these tools in their day-to-day work. Jennifer, I don't know if you want to kick off on that one.
Sure. This is such an exciting time to get involved because AI is much more accessible than you may think. And with the rapid pace of change, everyone is somewhere on the learning curve. So you're probably not very far behind, and it's quite easy to access what's out there now and learn on your own. So I think the reason it's so important is because we're already seeing shifts in how work gets done and what employers expect. So I would recommend a few potential avenues of upskilling and becoming more familiar with these tools. The first is just in your personal day-to-day. So there may be constraints in terms of what you can do at work, but the more that you use these tools, even simple, more chatbot-based tools such as ChatGPT, Claude, Perplexity, etc., to plan a trip or to do research or to potentially even play around with low-code, no-code for automating some workflows. You learn so much more about what the tools can do that you can then bring in and apply to your workflows. And that would be the next thing I would say is start to evaluate your workflows. Where's their friction today? As I said before, where are their client pain points? Where is the friction between teams, reconciliation issues, et cetera? What's really taking time and what could help you do your job more effectively and serve your clients better? And then get involved in your internal processes, find out who's involved in these in AI initiatives. Even better, volunteer to champion AI initiatives for your team. And this could be bringing your team together to ideate around use cases and prioritize what you think would be most helpful. It could also be you finding out who all the subject matter experts are across the firm and bringing them in for teach-ins to understand how AI is being thought about and applied at your firm and the types of tools that are being brought to your organization, the constraints around data, et cetera, and how you get involved in that and take projects through governance. I think at the end of the day, this is not about being the most technical. It is really about just understanding how the tools can be applied and then applying that to your everyday work.
I'm hoping that my experimentation with ChatGPT to plan children's birthday parties will somehow filter into my day-to-day work. I guess
I think I was just going to add. I was just going to add to that. Like, what I find really interesting, actually, in working within a law firm, is when people start to engage and they start to see the value. And then when we're starting to move really from kind of groups of skeptics to real enthusiasts, and actually I love that. I love that shift, kind of almost evangelical about the use of this tech. But what I particularly like is when some of our more senior partners become real enthusiasts, because what they are really trying to channel is that they really get the idea of guardianship and succession. That what they are challenging their teams to think through is, we all want to have a career in 5 years and 10 years time. So what is that career going to look like? And in order to best prepare you for that, you need to kind of think now, how is this technology going to impact what I do today? What can I do to kind of maximize the use of it? What can I do to make sure that, I am understanding that impact and really and kind of embracing it and understanding what that will do to the work I do today and how I do it. I love it when I see partners having those conversations with the more junior people in their team, because it really does then give them the freedom to explore as to what this technology can potentially do, which I think is a great atmosphere to be working in.
I think being alive to the fact that our skills are going to have to develop, we're going to have to use different skills to really be productive in a world where AI is a feature, in terms of, even if it's just understanding the importance of prompts, for example, and using those tools with appropriate prompts rather than necessarily sitting down and drafting something. It's quite a big development, and as you say, it's great to see people kind of engaging with that. What do you think that the sort of primary transition will be in terms of the different skills that are going to become more and more important in this sort of hybrid world, I guess?
I think about this quite a lot, and I always come back to actually the things that make. Sorry, I apologize. I know I'm answering this in a very legal context, but the things that make a good lawyer, I think, will still hold. We want people to apply critical thinking. We want people to apply judgment. We want people to assess data, pick holes in it, come up with solutions, kind of think through what the optimum solution for that particular problem will look like. How the information that they are assessing comes to them might be different, but I still think those techniques of critical thinking are still relevant and will still apply. And the task is making sure people, recognize that they still need to apply those. If something comes packaged that looks like it might be the finished product, it's making sure people know that they need to challenge, they need to still apply their human judgment, their analysis, and really refine and make the output fit for purpose. So I almost think the skills that I'm looking for remain the same. It's just the information that they're applying them over might come to them in a different way. But that's my own personal. I wonder if Jennifer or Jonathan think something different.
Yeah, I would agree. And I see that question, one of our first questions in the Q&A was, how do you think junior lawyers should position themselves to stay relevant as AI takes over repeatable tasks? I think I would strongly recommend, wholeheartedly recommend that the people on the call really lean in on this technology. And this is something I would have glibly said a year ago. It's getting a lot more serious. Francesca mentioned, the December developer who said, hey, things are getting interesting. And we see that now. And, our perspective is, we want people to be very AI native, AI capable, because what's coming with this agentic AI that Jennifer touched on is longer duration, autonomous interactions. And if you're not comfortable with the technology now, which is kind of like the smaller version of it, it's going to be really challenging to really ramp up for what's to come. So I mean, I always tell people, lean in on the technology, and not just like casually prompt, purchase a paid version. I see another question touched on that. It doesn't matter which one, Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini, but I would spend the $20 a month and buy a paid version, which gives you access to the latest models, the latest features, and it has some guardrails around personal information and data. And then you have to discipline yourself. You have to spend some time on it. This is not something where you're going to approach it and you're probably going to look at this and think, oh, it's a Google box. I just need to search for something or do something. It's like the way you interact with these AIs are more conversational, more interactive. I think Francesca chatted about the prompt, the prompt structure, the tips and tricks, the best practices. This is not something that's just going to fall into your lap. You need to really invest some time, take a class, understand, within ChatGPT or whatever, what is prompt best practices? What are 20 prompts that would be very impactful for my daily work? You don't like those? Ask for 10 more. You want more detail? Ask for that. Use the features that are in these applications, the thinking models, the deep research, the other apps or capabilities within. But I would strongly recommend that folks, basically invest in their development and really understand kind of what's possible. I'll kind of wrap the point up with saying that these models, I think of generative AI as reasoning engines. I mean, these are basically reasoning engines with all that that entails. This is basically knowledge on tap, free knowledge. Now, that doesn't mean that you want to splash knowledge everywhere, and you've got to do a lot to kind of integrate it into your ways of working. But it is very powerful, and I think we have some interesting times ahead.
100%. And then just to wrap up, I guess something we were also discussing was sort of the impact of AI on graduates coming into the workforce and, what job opportunities will be available, etc. But actually, to your point, Jonathan, graduates probably also have a huge advantage in terms of being effectively natives, being almost by default, using these tools in the ways that are a lot more sophisticated than maybe some of the more senior people in organizations currently use. It's actually potentially sort of quite an exciting advantage, I think, for graduates coming into the industry, as opposed to necessarily just a scary picture of, fewer junior jobs, etc.
That's kind of like there's an interesting dichotomy. So when we talk to new employees, they're very excited about AI. I mean, when I first walked on the floor, I could feel the excitement, and they're also a little bit anxious, right? So you have this duality. They're very excited, but they're a little bit anxious. We would again advise people to lean in. About a year ago, all of our job postings now include generative AI. If I was somebody coming out of school, I would definitely be trying these tools on the side and I would be putting it on my resume. Like, I can't believe that I would see I've seen one or two technology resumes recently, and they didn't have generative AI, they didn't have Claude Code, they didn't have these tools. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like how is that even possible? So I think we definitely see the younger new hires being somewhat more open and more broadly using the technology. I was actually shocked. I was talking with just kind of coincidentally a couple of weeks ago with two different analysts, and in their personal use, they were doing these agentic coders that Jennifer mentioned. And so I was just like, I'm blown away. These are analysts who have no coding experience, and yet they're using these agentic coders to go out and create websites, to scrape the internet, to create functionality in their personal lives. So we're definitely seeing, I think Francesca touched on this as well. We're seeing new hires, kind of new entrants to the workforce, being very open to this technology, and we look to harness it. And again, would encourage folks to try it. Take it for a try. Commit to few hours every week for a couple of weeks and see where it takes you.
Just having a look at the sort of Q&A, one question was whether, Jonathan, to the points you've made, are there any sort of specific training courses that are good for people to do, or is it more a question of experimentation and playing around? If there's anything you particularly recommend?
So I would definitely recommend both. So you can go to like a Coursera or a Udacity or just YouTube videos. All of the model providers have so Anthropic and OpenAI have sessions on their YouTube channels. I would probably go to like one of the free online educational courses because I think that gets a little bit of structure and discipline to the topic. So I would definitely say you want to maybe get like an introduction to generative AI, introduction to prompting. Any one of them could do the job, but it's a great idea. It's a great question. It's a great idea to blend it. So you can get a little bit, you can go pretty far with, just prompting and just trying stuff out and iterating, but getting that educational component to back it up would be a great plus. And there's plenty of them out there. Of course, there are Udacity come to mind. There's another one. Andrew Ng has, I'd have to take a look what his course is, but Andrew Ng has a set of courses that are great. And just going on YouTube and Googling a little bit.
Makes complete sense. Jennifer, there's an interesting one for you, which actually I'm quite interested to hear your answer on, which is examples of any prompts that you can use for automating workflows in our personal lives.
Yes. So just to follow on to Jonathan's point as well, there are so many incredible YouTube channels that are excellent training for non-developers, and I listen to them all the time. And based on what type of tool you're interested in, you can go and do that. Or Microsoft and Google have other certifications as well. But what I would actually do is as Jonathan said, definitely paid for a paid subscription. It's worth it. It will get to know you, retain your history, have your context. And then anything that you go in, any prompts that you provide, it has all of that context about you. So I would say, one, go in and tell ChatGPT or Claude or any of them kind of a bit about your life. What do you do, like exercising? Are you, or do you like to read? Kind of, do you travel? And based on that, say perhaps one could be, put a schedule together for this week based on some of the things that I want to get done. Or one that I've used it for is renegotiating a rent renewal, for example. What's happening in the market in New York City right now in this area, and how should I think about having a conversation with the leasing office? So very simple things in your day-to-day, or take these notes of free text and turn it into action items and prioritize, a prioritized list of things to get done. It really, one thing that I would do is definitely go in and ask for a development training program. And what do you think I should do? This is the type of role I do. This is the type of life I lead. How do you think I could use AI most effectively? And what types of tools and trainings and certifications do you think would be relevant for me? It's really by asking some of these questions and engaging with it in that way that I think you'll get a lot of great output. Track trips as well. I use it all the time. Give me 3 itineraries for a 10-day trip, and I like to hike, and I want it to be warm weather, and I want it to be within X hours of flight away. Again, this is just learning, like the information that you give it helps inform the information that you get back. So that is understanding how to give good prompts.
And maybe just to start folks off, I'll give you 6 tips just right off the bat. Number 1, be specific, clear, and concise, much as you would with a person. You don't want to be vague. As much clarity as you can provide will get you off on the right foot. Provide context and references, provide source content, documents, links, whatever helps the model understand what you're trying to do. Define your output format. Do you want a bullet point list? Do you want a report? Do you want a short paragraph? Add examples, which is kind of like a little secret superpower. That helps guide the tone, the language, the structure. Iterate. Iterate's more of a behavioral trick. You always want to be like, okay, I didn't see this, can you find that? Or can you make this longer? Can you make it shorter? And then finally set some constraints. We always, in highly regulated industries, we're always throwing into a lot of our prompts. If you don't know the answer, if you don't have the information, don't guess, don't infer, just call it out. Or maybe it's that, show me the citation, tell me where you found this information. So those are just some quick tips to start.
I think another good one on there is don't tell me what you think I want to hear, because sometimes you need to remind it to be very objective.
That's very interesting, isn't it? Someone else has asked whether we'd recommend a specific AI tool over others. I guess they will have different use cases, or whether you look at sort of a combination of tools interacting with each other to the extent that's possible.
We've talked about ChatGPT and Claude. Those are the 2, I think, frontiers right now. You have Google Gemini and, quite a few others. But I wouldn't bifurcate myself too much. I would probably pick one, get the paid subscription, and really lean in on it. You can definitely explore Perplexity. I think was another thing that came up in the conversation today. So you can try different things, but I would pick one, and Claude and OpenAI, ChatGPT, you can't go wrong with either.
I tend to use Perplexity more so Perplexity was really built to ensure that there's specific citations, et cetera. So for research and analysis, it's sometimes more reliable, although ChatGPT has gotten much better with hallucinations, at least from my experience.
Quite a bit.
One thing that I like about ChatGPT is the ability to create projects. So I create different projects, whether it's one of my companies or maybe around research around digital assets or AI or trips, maybe it's personal, maybe it's business, but it retains all of that context, and I can put everything in there and store documents as kind of context history, which I also like. Claude has a lot of super interesting features as well. And if you want to start playing around with a little bit of kind of low code, there are a number of tools to look into on the Claude side as well.
And then I think maybe one final question. So someone's asked about risks in using AI that users should be aware of or look to mitigate. And I know we've talked a little bit about guardrails, etc. But I know, Francesca, if you want to sort of take that first.
Like the lawyer, I
Yeah, exactly.
need to answer this question. Actually, I was in a meeting the other day with one of our AI advisory lawyers, and he gave a surprising answer. He said the biggest risk, and this is to Jonathan's point, is not engaging with the tech. Like the tech is here. It's the worst it's ever going to be, and so to Jennifer's point, everyone's on a learning curve. The quicker you actually get on and start engaging with the tech, I think the better. For me, actually, the other risks are, and it goes back to I think the discussion at the start, just assuming that it's a finished product, that what it produces will be as good as what you could produce, straight out of the box. It's not. It really does need to be looked at, refined, validated, checked, and really adding your own human subject matter expertise is really critical. So not using it at one end of the spectrum, over-reliance on the other end of the spectrum, I think are my two biggest risks.
I think that's a really key point, that these models are not as strong or as capable as, a top person in their professional field. And so I think that's going to continue to be, kind of a sweet spot, which is that being able to take general content and evolving it to the next level that really provides the insights and the impact that our clients demand.
Fantastic. Well, maybe that's a nice place to wrap up. I hope that has been a really useful session for everybody. It certainly has been for me. As we mentioned, this is the first of a few AI-related sessions that we'll be running. There'll be more details of those to follow in due course. And we have also recorded this session, so that will be shared, after the session. Please do feel free to rewatch or share it as you feel fit.